Hello, everybody, and welcome to another installment of City Lights Live, the virtual extension of the City Lights events calendar. I'm Peter Maravellis, and tonight, City Lights and Alice James books celebrate the publication of Standing in the Forest of Being Alive, a new collection of poetry from Katie Farris, published by Alice James Books. Before we begin, as is customary at the outset of each event, I would like to acknowledge that we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral grounds of the Ramaytush peoples, also known as the San Francisco Bay Area. We would like to take this moment to offer our respect to those who have come before us as stewards of the land. Exposed to a broad range of poetry, as one is here at City Lights, one quickly becomes aware of a type of writing which is informed by, I guess, what I would characterize as an organic form of consciousness, a poetry which isn't interested in the current fashion or any particular scene per se, but more concerned with life itself, a type of poetry which is able to connect the reader to the core of their being. And this can be awe-inspiring as well as very disconcerting. The quotidian of the everyday can be thrown into disarray as we're given a glimpse into realities that are both marvelous and sometimes terrifying. There is poetry that can have the effect of alchemy, and the reader is guided into a deeply emotional and visceral interior space where truly horrific realities can be transformed into insight and wisdom. I speak of the substance of which Katie Farris's writing is made of. I applaud her ability to merge dreamlike, mythic, lyrical writing with a very spry demeanor while standing on the edge of an abyss which we all share, whether we realize it or not. And she stands as witness to these realities with great ferocity as well as tenderness. And to me, that is the sign of a great poet. So it is a pleasure celebrating this amazing new book. Katie Farris is the author of the chapbook, A Net to Catch My Body in Its Weaving, which won the 2020 Chad Walsh Poetry Award from the Beloit Poetry Journal, and the book Boysgirls, a hybrid form book, as well as she's a co-translator of many books of poetry. Her work has been commissioned by MoMA and appears in American Poetry Review, Granta, McSweeneys, The Nation, as well as other outlets. She is currently Associate Professor in Creative Writing at Georgia Institute of Technology. Standing in the Forest of Being Alive is her first book of poems. So joining her tonight is Ilya Kaminsky. Ilya is the author of the collections Deaf Republic, published by Graywolf Press, and Dancing in Odessa by Tupelo Press, and co-editor and co-translator of many other books, including the Ecco Anthology of International Poetry and Dark Elderberry Branch, Poems of Marina, Tsvetaeva. So he's received numerous honors for his work. These include the Los Angeles Times Book Award, National Book Critics Circle Award, amongst others. So before we begin, I would like to let you know we will be posting links in the chat function of your Zoom dashboard with which you may purchase copies of Standing in the Forest of Being Alive, as well as Ilya's books. So join us now in giving a warm welcome to Katie Farris and Ilya Kaminsky. Welcome to City Lights.
Thank you so much for having us. It's really an honor to be here and to talk to Katie about poetry any day. It's truly an honor for me. And of course, we are so grateful for everybody who is here with us today. We were wondering what is the best way to start. And it seems like the best way is always to start with a few poems. Maybe Katie, if you don't mind, maybe read some poems for us and then we'll try to have a conversation.
Sounds good to me. I wanted to say thank you to both to Ilya for being willing to be in conversation with me, and also to Peter for that introduction, and to City Lights. When I was a teenager and a very baby poet, I literally flew across the country to San Francisco just to go to City Lights. So this is a really big moment for me, life coming sort of full circle. It has been kind of a beacon for me of everything I thought poetry was or could be. So it's a little bit surreal, actually, to have this moment. So I'm going to read just a couple poems from the beginning of Standing in the Forest of Being Alive. which just to give you a little bit of context, I was diagnosed with breast cancer in August 2020. So I think I'll just start with just that much information. And the first poem here is called Why Write Love Poetry in a Burning World? To train myself to find in the midst of hell what isn't hell. The body bald, cancerous, but still beautiful enough to imagine living, the body washing, the body replacing a loose front porch step, the body chewing what it takes to keep a body going. This scene has a tune, a language I can read, a door I cannot close. I stand within its wedge, a shield. Why write love poetry in a burning world? To train myself in the midst of a burning world, to offer poems of love to a burning world. So the next poem in the book is called Tell It Slant, and it's got a little bit of a line of medicalese in it. So you may not have heard the word spiculated before. It's just how doctors say spiky. Carcinoma is just sort of a general term for a solid tumor. And you probably already know that Emily Dickinson, her advice to poets was basically to tell it slant instead of telling it straight on. So this is Tell It Slant. You float in the MRI gloam, several spiculated masses. I name you cactus, carcinoma be damned. You make a desert of all of me. Have I said it slant enough? Here's a shot between the eyes. 6 days before my 37th birthday, a stranger called and said, "You have cancer, unfortunately," and then hung up the phone. And let's see, I'll do one more. This is called In the Event of My. Just imagine, oh, actually here, this is an easy show and tell. So the cover of the book is actually my braid. I cut it off a couple days before chemotherapy started. So my freckly arm, my braid. So if you will, picture my braid for the beginning of this poem. In the event of my death. What used to be a rope descending my vertebrae to the basement of my spine grows thin. In solidarity with my first chemotherapy, our cat leaves her whiskers on the floor. I gather them, each pure white parenthesis, and plant them in the throat of the earth. In quarantine, I learned to trim your barbarian hair. Now it stands always on end, a tribute to my superior Barbary skills. In the event of my death, promise you will find my heavy braid and bury it. I will need a rope to let me down into the earth. I've hidden others strategically around the globe, a net to catch my body in its weaving. So I thought we'd kind of go back and forth a little bit between poems and questions, between your questions and the audience, maybe between Ilya's questions. And I know he's going to read for us a little bit too. So does anybody have a question? It looks like Ilya already has a question. Okay.
I got a question, if you don't mind, while others might be typing in. So I have seen you write these poems right in the middle of that crisis, the health crisis you were going through. And of course, there was all other kinds of crises, national crisis going on, the pandemic going on, the uprising in the capital going on, criminal uprising, I should add. I wonder if you can give us a little bit of a window, because the poems are so tender, if I may, going through so much crisis, for the lack of a different word. How did they happen? for you as a writer?
That's a good question. And a funny one, because you were also right there with me through a lot of it. But I know it's tough to figure out how things happen as they're happening. But basically, I think what was most essential for me at that time was I was writing social media posts, just trying to update, several friends on what was happening so I wouldn't have to call everybody individually, and posting a selfie for the first time in my life. I was posting selfies. I'd never done that before. And but just sort of to be like, I'm here, I'm still here, And actually you suggested that I should start posting poems. And because I was writing in the background, I was trying to write. I was so scared of not being able to write anymore. And so writing felt very necessary, but tough to do, very difficult. So I posted a poem, I don't know, something like maybe just after my second, I think, chemo was when I did it. And I was so surprised. There was a part of me that was like, nobody wants to read about this. Nobody wants to read about something so difficult. We're all going through something so difficult right now with the pandemic, with the politics. So many, felt like every day a new Black or brown person was getting shot. How could I possibly be posting poems? But amazingly, people were responding. People would reach out and say something like, you don't know me, but I've had cancer too. And you put words to an experience that I've had that I haven't been able to put words to. Or somebody wrote and said, my sister had breast cancer and I always wanted to talk to her about it, but she didn't really want to talk. But I feel closer, I feel closer to her now that I've had the experience of reading this poem. So, and I was very surprised and very moved by that. And I think if it hadn't been for the people who were expressing that I had helped fulfill some sort of need, I don't think I could have kept writing. It was hard. Physically, it was hard. I was not feeling well, and I was struggling in a lot of ways, but it became kind of an anchor for me, and a community for me at a tough time. And I think I'm guessing for a lot of us, how we respond to crisis is through community. And luckily for me, that community at that point also included poetry. And of course, also there was just the pressure of mortality itself. Initially with my diagnosis, it looked very good, and it seemed like, and it actually was, with every step that we went along the way, it got more and more serious, and it looked worse and worse. And I honestly was frightened about whether I was going to keep living. And that's very motivating. It's not, I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but it's very motivating in terms of getting things done. So I was pumping out the poems. I was working hard on my editorial stuff. I was doing all my homework on time for once. Oh, honey, you gotta, yeah, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I get muted sometimes. Yes, I'm talking too much. But I put in the chat, I'm trying to get a little bit more in terms of language and your relationship to it, because there is such a private relationship to music and tone, or rather as a tone of music in these poems, the way the inner rhyme works, and also the way Emily Dickinson seems to play a role, not just as a character, but as a kind of presence on a level of language, and not just for a narrative, but sound to sound kind of movement. And I wonder if you could chat a little more about it. What is the language doing?
I would be happy to. And maybe before I do that, I would love to read you an Emily Dickinson poem, if I might. There are kind of two major ones in the poem, and I'll read them both. They're both short. So the first one, and this will help answer the question I think, too, because they're written very much in Emily Dickinson's form and style. And just a short story before I start with that. I was, when I got that phone call, the poem I just read y'all about, it wasn't quite the whole phone call. She said, I asked after she said, "You have cancer, unfortunately." I said, "Do you have any more information?" And she said, "No, somebody will call you within 2 weeks." And then she hung up the phone. And what I did was I got up, I put on my clothes, I drove to the oncologist's office, and I walked up to the front desk and I said, "I'm going to sit here all day if I have to, and I'm not upset, and but I'm going to sit here all day, and I'm going to wait for somebody to talk to me. And if there's nobody today who can talk to me, I will come back tomorrow, and I will do this until somebody has time to talk to me, because I'm not going to wait 2 weeks to talk about this." And what I brought with me, what happened to be in my bag, was Emily Dickinson's complete works. What happened to be in my bag? That thing weighs like 20 pounds. But I had been reading it since February. And so this is a little bit of a poem about that. This is called Finishing Emily Dickinson, First Deacon in William Blake's Church of the Marriage of Heaven and Hell in the Oncologist's Waiting Room. Oh, Emily, goodbye. We met in February and parted in July. I meet your sweet velocity in everything that flies, in mote and star and sphere, in bird and phosphorus of God. Oblique, you preached obliquity, your body steeple for the church of mystery, your bell rings on beyond. And if you're familiar with Emily's ballad meter, I've ripped it off entirely. This is alternating trimeter and tetrameter. If you're a meter nerd like me, I am rhyming a lot more than Emily Dickinson. She more tended to resist the rhyme, which is part of what makes, I think, her poems feel so modern. She sets you up for it and then she yoinks it away, but I found in her poems the way that she talks about illness a lot, or the way that she rotates around the idea of nation, of what isn't there anymore, was something that was very important for me as I was thinking about how to approach writing about cancer. So I'm going to read one more here. And I think the only thing you need to know, which you probably already know, is that a palimpsest is, it comes from manuscripts, like old vellum manuscripts, right? So back when paper was hard to make, and they skinned calves or lambs, I think, to make something like paper. So if they didn't need an old manuscript anymore, they'd scrape the ink off and write their new manuscript on it. But you could still see the echoes of the text behind it, right? So that's what a palimpsest is. Emiloma, a riddle and an answer. Will you be my death, breast? I had asked you in jest, and in response, you hardened, a test of my resolve, malignant, magnificent palimpsest. Will you be my death, Emily? Today I placed your collected poems over my breast, my heart knocking fast on your front cover. Will you be my death, chemo? The shell of myself in the sphere of time, plucking the wool of my hair from its branches. Will you be my death, Emily, and keep the sky from reaching inside? You, the voice, me, the faithful echo. Will you be my death, echo? Do you know? No. In which meadow, mow, the ginkgo grows, goes, which is fallow, which furrowed, foes, what is winnowed, what is woe. The end is a little hard to hear. I'm going to try to hold it up here if you can see it, showing the sort of echoes in the italics. Is that visible at all? I don't know. Anyway, bad show and tell. Thank you. So yeah, in that, playing around more with sound, again, rhyme is definitely something I'm always going to do, but trying to play with telling it slant in terms of the rhyme itself as well. You know, slant is not just for content, you know, slant is for rhyme as well, I think. And okay, yes, okay, I'll answer Mandana's question here. So she said, now that they're in the world, am I seeing any of the poems differently? And has the act of poeting changed for me? And yes, I mean, there are some funny things that happen when you put poems out into the world. Like, I will read a short one called If Marriage. And this has gotten into the Twitter sphere. Occasionally it pops up, usually in a non-poetry oriented space, and it's always funny to see what people say. So, if marriage is a series of increasing intimacies, a slow, sweet collapse into oneness, I would still beg your forgiveness for asking your assistance unwinding that pale hair from my hemorrhoid. So yeah, that will occasionally pop up out in the world in Twitter, and you know, some people are like haha, and some people are like, oh, that's interesting, but some people are just like, what why would you do this? Why did I wake up to this in my Twitter feed? And that delights me. You know, it's fun to be writing something that people don't think of as poetry, and to maybe turn on some people to poems that wouldn't be, boy, that, oh, for a different choice of phrasing, but they might enjoy poetry in a different way. The poetry can be funny, the poetry can be unexpected, the poetry can be short, but it doesn't have to be a homework assignment. You know, that feels very exciting to me, and I feel lucky that this strange short poem could do that for other people. I think, though, most profoundly, you know, the effect is still more of people reaching out and saying, you know, I'm going through this right now, and it means something to me. And that feels like the most precious thing I can imagine. I'm actually getting a bit choked up about it right now. It's also 2:30 in the morning because I'm in Liverpool, but still I'm feeling. The response has been very, thankfully, quite positive for the most part. And I do worry about, you know, it's hard ever to be kind of the poster child of, you know, any kind of cancer or cancer writ large. And this experience is just mine. It's not anybody else's. And I do always want to make that clear. But I do feel very lucky. As far as the act of poeting, other than putting on my big girl poet pants and going out in the world and doing readings and things like that, which I haven't been doing much of, I have not been writing much lately. I kind of go through periods where I write very intensely and a lot at a time, and then periods that are kind of fallow. And I'm in one of those fallow periods right now. So I haven't really experimented much with how the writing has changed in the interim. But we'll see.
If you don't
Yeah.
mind, I just want to dig in a little bit more with some of what you said. And also in the chat, Mandana Chaffas uses this wonderful phrase, unpedestaling poetry. I love that phrase. So I want to dig a little bit more because after all, poetry is also unpedestaling of some of the more serious subjects in the world to make them a little more relatable. But I want to dig about that with you a little more and speak about students' perspective and tone in the book itself, because you call it a memoir. But in addition to speaking about gay illness and speaking about personal life, marriage, the book also addresses its moment in time. And you rarely read actually some of those poems, the America poems in the book. Maybe you can read one and then speak a little bit, maybe move from that directly to one of the more erotic poems or one of the more lyrical poems, and maybe read 3 of those. and chat a little bit about how the mind moves from one kind of poem to another. How does the book work with this change of perspective? What is being unpedestaled?
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to start with a short erotic poem, and then the invention of do a poem about America, and then two very short other poems afterwards. So these are 4 in a row. So yeah, we could talk a little bit about like a little tiny arc of in the book. This is called Rachel's Chair. Once, many years ago, we made love at a friend's house. We were overnight guests, not perverts on the whole. But what I'm trying to say is that she owned a chair so perfect for lovemaking that we joked about taking it home. If I had only known then how rarely we would find such objects, I would have. The invention of America. I am trying to be a love poet, though I cannot escape America. It's as if I am married to America and no one stood to object. America would have objected itself if America wasn't so busy trying to jam America on my finger. Later, washing my hands, America rings as it lands in the porcelain America and clatters down the silver throat of America. I don't have a pipe wrench, so America arrives and saves the day, leaving America relieved to have America return to its America, where it reminds America of America. Everyone is writing about a country as if a country existed. As an anti-capitalist act, I reject your hierarchies of worth, America. All things are erotic. Oh, cockroach. Smooth as a lozenge, glossy as hard candy, antenna, clever as spun sugar, come into my mouth. I vote, but prefer smut to politicians, you gentle men. Everyone is writing about America's citizens as if they were visible. Why write love poetry in a time of government brutality? Can the plot prove the heart's loyalty? Blocked, beating the harder, love redoubling? Everyone is writing about a country as if a country existed. This is called Quid Pro Quo, a dedication. You said we could replace our lumpy 20-year-old mattress if I wrote you a poem. So here's your goddamn poem. And pirate haiku. 4 a.m. His left eye closes for the night. His stubborn right, reading. So, okay, your question was about tone and the balance of tone. So one of the things that I think is tricky when you've got very serious poems about sort of reckoning with your mortality, and poems in this case, I mean, that was one of the more lighthearted poems about America relative to some of the other ones in the book. But, you know, still a serious poem in the context of the time, where you can't escape, you know, this feeling that America is just, it's filling up everything. You can't turn anywhere without thinking about, you know, what the country means. And it was meaning not good things in that moment, to put it mildly. So how do you balance that and make it readable? You know, if you just stacked all those big poems next to each other, you know, I've got a poem about radiation. I've got a poem about, you know, trying to get, you know, appealing my healthcare coverage. I've, you know, a lot of serious poems in this book, but if you put them all next to each other, it's so hard to read. And that can be okay. I mean, there are great books of poems that are very difficult to read. And the reality is, you know, the experience is difficult. for me, the way that I get through things is with humor. It's always been like that. I've never written humorous poems before, so it was very challenging for me. Rachel's Chair is a poem that I never thought would make it all the way to the book. I kept trying to cut it, and people kept being like, you gotta put that back in. It's a poem that people really love. And I was like, really? Okay, I guess. But it helps move you along. I think sometimes it helps create a space where you can sit and absorb some of the bigger, more difficult emotional pieces in the work. That's at least my hope. That is my intention for those short pieces along the way. Did I miss some part of your question? I feel like I might have.
It might be a good thing to read some of the poems that are most emotional for you.
Oh boy.
Just to give us a taste. So you read some lighthearted, now maybe move us to a different emotional range.
Okay. Yeah. I can do that. I will read. I think that there's one that I'm going to read that it was the most difficult, but I'm actually going to start with something a little easier for me and just kind of work my way into it. So this is called The Wheel. And it's actually, I've got a couple references to tarot cards through the course of the book, and that is one of them. And I don't think you really need to know anything else to begin with. Okay, The Wheel. One must train oneself to find in the midst of hell what isn't hell. For instance, the way you folded love into a booklet and gave it to me to read. What isn't hell is your big belly now, how it rounds itself, my hemisphere. Ugly gardenias and muggy sunsets, horizon glowing orange as a riot. All these I find, and they are not hell. I like a pebble in my mouth, how it tastes like beets. I like beets, how they taste like dirt, and cool white wine, drinking as your fingers work their way between stockings and thigh. To train myself to find in the midst of hell what isn't hell, I grub at the roots of words, your dirty Latin. Finding a mouse in Russia's armpit, or the doll baby in the deep black pupil of an Englishman's eye. What is not hell is whispering, I like my body when it's with your body. The way the poet Cummings, a mannequin, crawls from between my teeth and over my lip, watching us, his hands down the front of his pants. I like the wheel. I like its flame, how it crushes and uplifts in one moment. I like how its hub is the pupil of everyone's eye, how we're all afraid to die, how we go down, howling, beating the drums of our own bodies. And this is the last poem that I'm going to go back a little bit and say there's a couple of funny things that I should have actually mentioned. So the word for armpit in Russian is podmyshka. And when I first found this out, I was like, God, that myshka means mouse. And I think doesn't pod mean under? Under. So I was like, doesn't this mean under the mouse? And it's such a great image if you think about it, a little mouse, and what's underneath the mouse. And pupil, this is just one of my favorite etymological facts ever. Pupil literally means like little person, like if you think about a pupil as a student, because if you lean really close into and look at somebody's pupil, you see yourself reflected back, right? When I found that out, it was just, such a lovely moment. Yeah. Okay, I keep putting off reading this poem, but I'm going to read it now. It's called To the Pathologist Reading My Breast, Palimpsest. And this is written with Kimberly Point du Jour, MD. And this is based on my pathology report. So after you have a mastectomy or any surgery where they remove a tumor, they examine whatever they find and you get a pathology report back. So I've got some technical language in here. No doubt you will recognize this is from my pathology report. Specimen B, received fresh and subsequently placed in formalin, consists of an 18 by 15.5 by 3 centimeters simple oriented mastectomy. Dear doctor, you've done my work for me in your first line with your tidy slanting rhyme of specimen and formalin. To rhyme mastectomy, I thought, my dear friend's pregnancy. She and I, our birthdays, 2 slender months apart, both of us harboring rapidly dividing cells so near our hearts. How's that for art? Present on the anterior surface is a tan, grossly unremarkable skin ellipse with an eccentric, soft, everted nipple. Beneath my grossly unremarkable skin ellipse, an inscription there of every kiss, a couple playful, too hard twists, and late night drunken dare you strips, but mostly my own homely grip as I skidded into sleep. And that's actually one of the shorter, more emotional poems, but there are also very big kind of like standing pieces, and I think of them kind of like pillars through the book. And that was a way that I started to visualize, how am I going to space out these big kind of emotionally intense poems with something a little lighter and airier in between. And there was a question a little bit further back that I wanted to make sure to address. Kimberly said that she observed that I said that I became aware that I might not continue to live versus an awareness that I might die. And speaking to that linguistic distinction, if there was one on a conscious level, and there wasn't, but I'm sort of cracking up now thinking about it, because I think on some level, I was like, it's too early in the conversation to say, I thought I was going to die. I was afraid I was going to die. I was like, that's too heavy. I can't put that out there. So I think I backpedaled a little bit in that moment. But I do think that my focus tends to be where I can. I still have cancer. I'm still in treatment for cancer. My cancer is a tricky one because it's not visible in scans. It forms these little brittle threads instead of forming lumps. And so people with, it's called invasive lobular carcinoma. It's the second most frequent form of breast cancer, but the first invasive ductal carcinoma is something like over 80% of cases are invasive ductal, and that forms lumps. So the fact is that for a lot of us who have lobular, you don't know that you have cancer until your cancer is quite advanced. And that's what happened to me. I had quite a large lump eventually form in my breast, but like they did scans in my lymph nodes and they saw nothing. But when they actually operated and took them out, they're chock full of cancer. So it's unfortunate that that's true also with metastasis. It's often, you don't know that the cancer has spread until several years later, but it's been growing that whole time. They just can't see it. And so I think that there's a way that I kind of, I'm currently what they call NED, no evident disease. But it's not trustable. There's no reason to assume, actually, in my case, that there wouldn't be cancer elsewhere, other than we don't see it. All of that to say, I try to keep the emphasis where I can on living when I can, because that is when you're living with perpetual uncertainty, which so many people with so many diseases do, right? It becomes second. I think initially a lot of us struggle to focus on the living part. It's so overwhelming to be afraid of mortality. So it is my attempt. I'm not always successful at it, but I'm getting more practice, and I feel lucky to be able to do that. Yes, Ilya.
If I may, I want to bring this conversation about mortality a little bit to the level of language and of wonder. To the level of language, I mean in terms of poems such as A Prayer to the God of Radiation, and in terms of wonder, to the poem that was Outside of Atlanta Cancer Care.
Yes.
Because it seems the question of mortality can be so overwhelming, so large, but it can also seem to be a door towards other things. And those poems seem to me, as somebody who was watching you while writing these poems, they seem to be a kind of door to a different perspective. If you don't mind sharing those, that would be great.
Thank you. Yes. Yes. So a little tiny bit of backstory to the God of Radiation. I had finished my chemotherapy. I'd finished my mastectomy. I thought I'd finished my radiation. We were in the final stretch, and my radiation oncologist said, we've done a scan and there's a spot, and we don't know if it's cancer or not. We can radiate it, and if we radiate it, it'll go through. I already had some quite extensive nerve damage from my mastectomy. And she said, the radiation is going to make that worse. And I can't tell you how bad it'll be. It might be very bad. It might be very painful or debilitating, but it might not be that bad. If you choose not to get radiation, you can't do any more radiation after that. I mean, if you don't get radiation, it turns out to be cancer. We can't perform a surgery on it because your skin is too fragile now. We can't do any more radiation. You've received your lifetime maximum of radiation in the area. And my cancer turned out to be chemo resistant. So she said, basically, you won't be able to treat that cancer. It will be incurable at that point, or untreatable at that point. So this is a poem about grappling with that question. And I want to say also that I was very appreciative of this doctor who I said, well, what would you do? What would you do if it was your daughter, or your mother? And she said, I've been up all night grappling with that question. And honestly, I can't give you a good answer. It's so close. It's just 50-50, So to the God of Radiation. Given the unexpected choice between uncertain death and certain damage, I find in the mirror a woman, breastless, burned, who in an advisory capacity asks, how much do you want to live? Enough. O God of Radiation, let your light like a ship pass through me, your radiance exposing what's inside me like film a god takes. But must you clatter the eaves of my scapula, scurry the grasshopper nest of my heart, scythe my nerves and cobweb my muscles to the rungs of my ribs? How much more can one body take? Enough. Light every deadly cell like a wick, burning in the paper lantern of my chest, a thing so ephemeral, yet held so firmly in your fist. And this is fun. I don't usually read my poems out of order. This is called Outside Atlanta Cancer Care. I return to this point of wonder. Actually, I'm going to back up just very briefly and say, just think about other bipedal animals out in the world. Like, think about a kangaroo and the size of a kangaroo's feet, okay, relative to the rest of its body. They are enormous. Okay, I'm going to stop and read the poem now. This is called Outside Atlanta Cancer Care. I return to this point of wonder. What kind of animal began to stand on such small feet and only two? What vertical absurdity? What upright madness? Perhaps we were imitating the trees, lifting our arms, wishing for roots, and then just forgot to set ourselves down on our four more rational feet. Our longing grew our fingers longer, twigs into branches. For if you long hard enough, do you not find fruit in your palms? I return to this point of wonder. I like what you say about the door. I think there's a strange way that awe and terror are so intimately related, right? As Rilke so beautifully said, I can never remember the quote, but about the angels. Um, it's so they're so close. They're right next to each other. And there were times in the midst of my terror that I felt a strange sort of ecstasy, um, and vice versa, you know. And I think that too is the sort of thrill of um, if I'm not going to be here for much longer, you know, I'm just mainlining everything. I'm mainlining light and the beauty of light and the beauty of, you know, any little detail. It was very, for me, it was very technicolor. I think there are some people for whom it's not like that at all. And I completely uh, can understand. I've gone through other illnesses in my life where I didn't get any of that. You know, sometimes cancer is just shitty, pure and simply. Um, uh, this is just how it was, you know, for me. So yeah. Yes, you have a question, sir.
I would like to unpack the word ecstasy a little bit. You have some very short poems in the book that have to do with waiting or time. Then slightly longer poems in the book that I'm thinking of one that ends in the word needle, that deal with anger, the ecstasy of anger. And then towards the end of the book, the title poem or the final two poems, that deal with more ecstasy of transformation, of embracing the planet. So I want to unpack it a little bit, maybe if you don't mind reading some of them, and we can chat perhaps, of what kind of forms can ecstasy take and why?
That is an interesting question. It is right up my alley, so I will definitely do that. So this is called Woman with Amputated Breast Returns for Her Injection. I'm just trying to see if there's anything here that needs to be. So Zoladex is the name of a certain kind of medication that they give to, I think that they only give this one to women. And basically what it does is, well, actually, they give it to people with ovaries more accurately. So it turns your ovaries off, basically. It prevents them from producing estrogen, because my form of cancer, as many forms of cancer do, kind of eats up estrogen and progesterone and grows off of it. So that I no estrogen for me anymore. So this is woman with, and it comes in an enormous needle, like the size of this needle, you guys. Every month I see it coming toward me and I'm like, really? Oh God, okay, here we go. Here we go again. It's like a very sharp cannon. Woman with amputated breast returns for her injection. Now I lack the muscle to pull me into the third dimension, but in these two, I can give you the world. 3 drains, 5 scans, $20,000. Come, doctor, how do you like me now? I never wanted to be anything but biddable. You see the outline of my shape? Fill it with your pencils, 7 points tickling me with color. I can. Watch me can, watch me do, watch me has, watch me watch. This cancer patient has ambition. I scratch, and here we are dancing the chart. When you give me that Zoladex shot, it's from one long needle and right in the gut. Yeah, I was quite angry when I wrote that poem. And I'm gonna read, I think I will read Ice for Me, which is the second to last poem at the end of the book, which has a different, I do find this to be an ecstatic poem. I don't know, maybe y'all will feel differently. I'll be curious if, if you agree with me on this. This is called Ice for Me. It comes from a Robert Frost poem, which you may be familiar with, and it begins with the first line, "Some say the world will end in fire. But if it's not cancer, it will be ice for me, Robert. A long, cold sleep on the hairy chest of the forest, yes. Tugged and tickled by beasts to death, yes. I'll walk willing between the curtains of the trees." It's sort of a cold ecstasy versus the very hot ecstasy of that first sort of angrier poem. But I think that first poem particularly, that sense of if ecstasy actually means standing beside oneself in the Greek, this idea of being beside oneself in whichever emotion you happen to be feeling. At that moment, I was so angry, I couldn't make sense anymore. Language kind of dissolved. Like there's a wonderful line in The Windhover by Gerard Manley Hopkins where he just loses language and he just goes, "Oh, air, pride, plume, buckle." It's just words, it's word soup. But he's just reached this level of ecstasy where things sort of start to dissolve. And his is more, a longing or an admiration, whereas mine was just sort of pure fury. But yeah, that was definitely an ecstatic experience. And Ice for Me, I think, kind of getting back to this question of mortality is, there were some days when I could make a lot of peace with it, and I'm going to work at the end. So bear with us just a couple minutes longer, and I will read that poem where I feel like I could finally make some sort of peace with it. But that the poem prior to it that I just read about Ice for Me, it's a strange thing to be speaking about your death, and there's kind of a natural dissociation, I think, that was happening for me in that moment. So it was a way that I was standing. I almost view it as vertical as opposed to horizontal, but I was still sort of standing outside of myself in that moment. So I'm going to read, Grace has one quick question, and then I'll read the last poem in the book. And I'm so sorry if I missed any of your questions, and feel free to be in touch with me. Like on Twitter, it's at Katie Farr. I'll put it in the chat real quick here in case you need to know something. She said, "It seems you wanted to create a digestible read. You mentioned balancing the bigger, emotionally intense poems with lighter ones. I was wondering if the intentionality of that balance was for the reader or for you to help you balance your own life." It's a really good question. I mean, both is the easy answer, of course, and the poetic answer, so that's appropriate. I think for me, as I was writing, there are probably an additional 100 poems that I wrote around this time that didn't make it into the manuscript, which is sort of the ghost manuscript behind, the one that actually emerges here. And I will say, I think a lot of those were more lighthearted and funny than serious. The serious poems were the hardest ones for me to write. And I struggled with some of them quite a lot, especially the pathology poem that I read. And so it was like for every one serious poem that I finished, I would do 20 funny little like asides, some of which were more cutting, some of which were more gentle and tender. I think a therapist would probably have some things to say about how I deal with trauma and how I try not to deal with trauma. But I do think, so in a way that informed the book itself. And I think it makes it hopefully a little easier for people who maybe haven't had this experience themselves, or maybe actually, you know what, fuck that. Actually, I think it probably makes it easier for those of us who have had that experience, you know, for people who also have gone through, and everybody's had traumatic experiences. And it can be hard to read about other people's sometimes, but that that sense of humor that develops around those things, again, not for everybody, but I think that can make the medicine go down, you know, to quote one of my heroes. Um, so yeah, I think I will go ahead and read my final poem in here. And if you guys still want to stick around and ask more questions, I would be very happy to keep chatting for another, 25 minutes or so. But I want for those people who are like, I have an hour and I have to go, to go. Sorry, that's the teacher in me. So this is called What Would Root? Walking through a cathedral of oak trees and bristlecone pines, scolded by squirrels in their priestly black, their white collars wagging with the force of their scolding, I was struck simultaneously in both eyes by some sort of flying detritus, pollen or seeds, and stopped to lean against a rock to scrub it, I thought, away. It was May, it was May, it was May, and the air was sweet with pine and island mountain lilac. The squirrels, I mentioned them already, etc., and the lizards ran down the spines of rocks like a bad feeling. I could see everything. Red-headed hummingbirds dipped their beaks into the little red hoods of penstemon, and I, a redhead, could hear everything. A red-crested woodpecker who was not offended, I did not know his name. Everything smelled green. It was all green, really. Even the red was anti-green. And though my eyes ached from everything seeing, I could taste the granite in the spring. Oh yes, I drank water from the ground. I was wild even then, though the squirrels scolded me and tried to convince me I was not. Soon I crested a rise. The land spread itself greenly for me, and I wished I had seed to toss into that green just to see what would root. My right eye would not close to this view. Why would it? But when I reached up to touch it, I felt a twig emerging and another from my other eye. That they were a part of my body, I could not doubt. They were living and enervated and jutting out. I sat down, feeling the hairs on the back of my neck, understanding for the first time they were not hairs, but roots. Everything was everything. The twigs in my eyes tasted sunlight with my mouth. The roots drew the salt from my sweat into their vacuum, and I was no longer hungry. Everything. It was all green. The roots in my skull shifted, and I lay down beneath my own branches. I had to wiggle a bit to find a place to lay my head. The rock was very hard, and I needed softer ground. Yes, a place for the top of my head to come off, to nuzzle into the earth, to drink. Um, I forgot to mention that this is my last nod to Emily Dickinson. She said she knew that something was poetry if the top of her head came off. So that is my last sort of moment of homage to her on the other side. And for me, when I was trying to make that kind of piece with, the possibility that started at one point feeling like uh, a probability that that I might die, I started thinking about biology is my first love. It was what I studied in school. And I thought, if my body breaks down and nourishes other bodies, I'm a part of something so extraordinary and so, billions of years old that there have been life on this earth. I can be okay with that. I can be okay becoming a part of something else. For me, as I was kind of working through it, I was like, that is an afterlife I can get behind, you know? And so that final experience of ecstasy, I think, is more about transmutation, about becoming something else, about life becoming life, but remaining life, all the way through. So that was a really, it was important for me, and it's something that I lose sometimes. I've had a couple of very existential experiences along the way too, but that for me was the thing that made it as okay as I could. And to be able to end a book, at the time that I was finishing this book, I was still very much in the throes of treatment, and there was no certainty, and there still is no certainty. So I didn't want to end this book on some sort of false positive note. I think one of the hardest things for us to do when when we're sick, or when somebody we know is sick, or even somebody we don't know is sick, we want to be like, but you're going to get better, right? Or to say, I'm going to get better. But there's no guarantees of that. And how do I acknowledge that truth while not being a total bummer, man? Like, I'm joking, but I'm also not joking. And this is how I tried to do that for the reader as well. And it's kind of a slow introduction. There's like, I kind of end the book several times, and they kind of have to roll together, because I think it's a hard sell. It's a hard sell that I'm not going to tell you what's going to happen, because I don't know what's going to happen, because you don't know what's going to happen, because the doctors don't know what's going to happen, because no one does, so that is my attempt at that. I'm gonna scroll back a little bit and just see if there were any other questions that didn't get answered. And again, if you have any more questions, we've got a few more minutes. Zoom's gonna kick us out at 30, whatever hour it is, 30 on whatever coast you happen to be. Okay. Thank you so much. You've so many lovely notes. I really appreciate. Oh, Hannah Seiden asked, has poetry helped with living with uncertainty? She's curious whether it allows for an expression that can encompass uncertainty versus other types of writing. Wow, Hannah. Yeah, you already wrote it for me. I don't hardly have to do any work. I think poetry is really good at uncertainty, as opposed to a novel. If you read 300 pages and it ends with like that, you set up a contract with a reader, no matter what you're sitting down to read. And I think with a novel, you're expecting some sort of satisfactory answer. I hope that there is satisfaction with the end of this book of poems, but it's certainly not a traditional ending as such. And I think poetry has so much wonderful space for balancing contradictory ideas. It's a place where paradox can exist pretty comfortably. And maybe in some ways, even that might be part of our job, to help people. Well, I'm not going to say that, but part of our job is to be honest about the fact experiences are mixed. Things are not always one thing or another. They're very rarely pure, and we should maybe be suspicious of purity in, a lot of its forms. It can lead to some dangerous ideas. So yeah, I think poetry is a wonderful receptacle for uncertainty, and it certainly has helped me. It certainly helped me to be honest and to push myself always to go a little bit deeper and not give a pat answer to anything, whether that's about big stuff like mortality or intimate moments in a marriage, hemorrhoids, whatever, Okay, I'm reading at the end here. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. You are so wonderful. I'm sorry, Judy. I bogarted this whole night. I did. I took it away from Ilya. Ilya, do you want to read a poem or two for us?
I think folks probably want to call it a night, but I could read a translation, perhaps.
Oh, come on.
Just read a poem. People will leave if they need to leave.
Well,
They'll need.
let me read a translation that we did from Ukrainian or from a poet from Ukraine. If you would allow me to share screen.
Okay, but
Might not be possible to share screen.
okay,
Yeah.
you can share screen now.
I think I can share screen now. One moment. So here is a poem by the poet named Boris Khersonsky. Boris Khersonsky is a poet from Odessa, Ukraine. And this is a poem about history, or a poem with history in it, depending on which side of the pound you find yourself. They printed in the medical history, it's called. They printed in the medical history. There was no Holodomor. It was a stable delusion of Anna Mikhalenko, a teacher of Ukrainian literature. For 7 years, she was in a special psychiatric hospital. It was a hybrid hospital, a madhouse and a prison. It was a time of hybrid hospitals. Now is a time of hybrid war. 7 years is a biblical phrase. And Jacob served Laban 7 years for Rachel because he loved her. 7 years. Rachel calls for her children. She can't calm herself because they don't exist. And let's see. Here is another poet also from Ukraine. This poet wrote in Ukrainian. Let me share a screen for you. I'm sharing screen because I speak with a pretty heavy accent, and it might be just a little bit easier for folks. So this is a poem by a Ukrainian poet, a very young poet, Lysyuk Panasyuk, who's from a town of Bucha. You might have heard about Bucha and the horrors that happened there. So this is one of his poems translated from Ukrainian. Letters of the alphabet go to war, clinging to one another, standing up, forming words no one wants to shout. Sentences that are blown up by minds in the avenue, stories shelled by multiple rocket launches. A Ukrainian word is ambushed. There is a broken window of the letter D. Other countries watch how the letter I loses its head. How the roof of the letter M falls. The language in a time of war can be understood. Inside this sentence is a hole. No one wants to die. No one speaks. But the hospital bed of the letter E lies a prosthesis it is too shy to use. You can see the line through the collapsing zone of holes of the letter F. The soft sand had its tongue torn out due to the disagreements regarding the etymology. Torture. There is too much alphabet in the hospital rooms of my country. Too much alphabet. No place to stick an apostrophe. point falls off the walls, covering us with the words incomprehensible, like men who, in the wartime, refuse to speak. I wanted to read specifically translations because Katie and I did those together, and they really shows the other side of what Katie was going through as well. There was this huge public crisis, both in America and in Ukraine, and obviously a private crisis in the household. And I asked her questions about these poetic devices in your tone, perspective, because sometimes those are the saving graces that we still have. And so I wanted to end on this poem about the letters of the alphabet, because sometimes when a person is drowning in the world, we are lucky to find a few pieces of wood floating above the water that we can cling to. And those letters of the alphabet can be such words. I hope that makes sense. Katie, I don't know if you want to step in, maybe.
Yes, I am some minor technical difficulties here. Okay, there we go. I'm back. Thank you, everybody who, that was a beautiful reading, Ilya, and I do love those two poems so much. And of course, Ilya's anthology of Ukrainian poets in translation is on the verge of coming out, I believe. Is that correct? Ilya, is your book of translations coming out soon? Your book of Ukrainian translations?
The anthology, well, the book that Katie and I did come out already from Lost Horse Press, and that was the very first poem that I have read called The Country Where Everyone Name is Fear. And the anthology that Caroline Fortune and I edited had just come out this month from Aerosmith Press, and that is where the Lisyuk's poem, Lisyuk Panasyuk's poem that Katie and I translated was published. It begins that book. I should also add there is a striking story behind that poem. Lisyuk Panasyuk comes from a town of Bucha, which is a very well-to-do town, or used to be a well-to-do town. So he and his family were able to escape as many of the lucky residents of town, not so lucky ones. You might have seen the pictures on TV. But after he came back, because it was an affluent town, people were able, they began to check what was happening. And so somebody had this strange idea to check the levels of radiation. And so the soldiers stayed in Lisyuk's house. And when they checked for radiation, they found out that the level of radiation was normal. The house is completely uninhabitable. Speaking to the god of radiation on the other end, right? And so you realize that probably two teenagers that got pushed in the army by Putin's government walked all the way from Chernobyl to the other side of the country, to Bucha. Walked, stayed in that house, and now the house is uninhabitable. How much radiation they had to carry in their body all through the country to make that so. And what kind of poetry, what kind of poetic devices can we use to describe something like that? What kind of letters of the alphabet? But I'm talking too much.
No, I think you're talking just enough. That's an incredibly important thing to be aware of as well. But, there are people still here in the audience, and I think you should read Musica Humana.
No, I think people need to go to sleep.
Oh,
Perhaps
please,
you're
just
still
one
asleep.
more. Just one more.
Just one more.
I want to be respectful of people's time, but okay. Let me just pull it up in a moment on the share screen, okay? And please, if you need to go to sleep, go to sleep. Don't feel like you have to stay up for this adventure. But meanwhile, here is the share screen. Since Katie's poems are so much in conversation with other voices, Emily Dickinson prominently, but also Hopkins, also Ginsberg of all people, also Plath, Brooks, so many other voices. I figure I will read a poem that is dedicated to another poet as well. Since I'm speaking about the dictatorial government of Putin, here is a poem about a poet, a lyric poet, great lyric poet, Osip Mandelstam, a Jewish poet, who had to deal with another government. He wrote a poem against government in the 1930s. It happened to be Joseph Stalin's government, which means that he was sent into exile where he died. And his wife, Nadezhda, was also sent into exile, but she survived it. This poem will take me about 8 minutes. So again, if you need to go to sleep, God bless you, go to sleep. Here is a poem for Osip Mandelstam called Musica Humana. A modern Orpheus, sent to hell, he never returned. While his widow searched across 1/6 of the earth's surface, clutching the saucepan with his thumbs rolled up inside, memorizing them by night in case they were found by Furies with a search warrant. While there is still some light on the page, he escapes in a stranger's coat with his wife, and the close smells of sweat that runs after them, licking the earth where they walked and sat. In a kitchen, on a stairwell above the toilet, he will show her the way to silence. They will leave the radio talking to itself. Making love, they turn off the lights, but the neighbor has binoculars and he watches. Dust settling on his lips. It is the 1930s. Petersburg is a frozen ship, the cathedrals have passed down Nevsky Prospect. They move as a new state. Ticks, it spins into them. In Crimea, he gathered together rich liberals and said to them strictly, at the judgment day, if you asked it, whether you understood the poet Osip Mandelstam, say no. Have you fought him? You must answer, yes. I'm reading aloud the book of my life on earth and confess. I love it. Grapefruit in the kitchen, sausages, testing vodka, the men raise their cups. A boy in a white short, I dip my finger in the sweetness, mother watching behind my ears, and we speak of everything that has not come true. Which is to say, it was August, the lightning trees full of fury, August filling hands with a language that tastes like smoke. Now, memory, pour some beer, sell the rim of the glass. You, who are writing me, have what you want. A golden coin, my hand, to put it under the younger brother of a cloud. He walks on shaving and dark green pants. In Casillas, he falls on his knees. Rain, happiness. His words in the floor are the skeletons of dead birds of love. Yes, pushed my hands. Book of loyalty to the earth. Now dance. A lover boy counts my fingers. I escape and I'm caught, escape again, and I'm caught, escape. And I'm caught. It's a song. The city is a clay figure. Poetry is the South. I resist the South. Elsewhere, St. Petersburg stands like a lost youth whose churches, ships, and guillotines accelerate our lives. In summer, 1924, Osip Mandelstam brought his young wife to St. Petersburg. Nadezhda was what the French call loud, mais charmant, and eccentric. Of course he was. His real student down the staircase for complaining he wasn't published. Osip shot him. Was Safa. Was Jesus Christ. Poet. The voice I say like Icarus whispered into himself as he falls. Yes, my life as a broken branch in the northern Granta. I'm writing now a history of snow, the lamplight bathing the ships that sail across the beach. But on certain afternoons, the Republic of sun opens up, and I grow frightening that I haven't lived. Not enough to scratch this ecstasy in the vast. Here, splashes of clear biblical speech are Plato, Augustine, the loneliness of their syllables while Icarus keep falling. And I read Akhmatova, her each weight binds me to the earth, and a reason a tear is breathing to the air. The daylight. Yes, I live. This time by the field, I saw St. Petersburg daughter swamps. I learned the grammar of God's array and found myself for good. I pushed it straight while memory sat in a corner, erasing me with a sponge. I have made mistakes. Yes, in bed, I compared government to my girlfriend. Government, and I can barbarian shoving off the skin. All of us dancing happily around him. He sat on the edge of his chair and dreamt aloud of good dinners. He composed his poems not at his desk, but in the streets of St. Petersburg. He adored the image of a rooster tearing apart the night under the walls of Acropolis with his son. Like a tap in the cell, he was pounding on the door. You have got to let me out. I wasn't made. Once or twice in his life, a man is spilled like apples. What is left is a voice that splits his being down to the center. We see obscenity, fright, mud, but there is joy of shame. There is always more. One. Between here and Nevsky Prospect, ears burned like stretch. Pray for this man who lived on bread and tomatoes while ducks recited his poetry in the street. Yes, Count Marjuly weaves them together with a thread. It is time, Lord. That's his words against your silence. The story is told of a man who escapes and is captured into the proud of evenings. After making love, he sits up on a kitchen floor, eyes wide open, speaks of the Lord's emptiness, in whose image we are made. He's out of work among silver and dirt. He's kissing his wife's neck so the skin of her belly tightens. One would think of a boy, then syllables with his tongue and their warm skin. Those are softening irony of silence. Nadezhda, his wife, looks up from the page and speaks. Osip, Akhmatov and I were standing together when suddenly Mandelstam melted with joy. Several little girls ran past us, imagining themselves to be horses. The first one stopped, impatiently asking, "Where is the last horsey?" I grabbed Mandelstam by his hand to prevent him from joining. And Akhmatova, too, sensing danger, whispered, "Do not run away from us. You're our last horsey." Nadezhda continues to speak. And I die. I walk barefoot across my country. Here winter builds a strongest solitude. Tractors break at the centaurs and gallops through plain speech. I'm 23. We live in a cocoon, the butterflies are matching. Osip puts his fingers in the fire, he gets up early, walking around in his sandals, right slowly. Prayers fall into the room, master watching him from the window. As his tongue presses over my skin, I see his face from underneath it, in clarity. Thus Nadezhda speaks. Standing in the orange light, her hands are quiet, talking to themselves. O God of Abraham, of Isaac, and of Jacob, on your scale of good and evil, put a plate of warm food. And my husband returned from Voronezh, in his mouth he hid a silver spoon. In his dreams, down Nevsky Prospect, the dictator ran like a wolf after his past, a wolf with sleep in its eyes. He believed in the human. The Jew himself of Petersburg, he recited by heart phone numbers of the dead. Oh, what he told in a low voice. The unspoken words became the traces of violence. When he slapped Tolstoy in the face, it was good. I took my husband. Each word disappeared in a book. They watched him as he spoke. The fathers had his and they said, "You must leave him alone, for already behind his back the stones circle all by themselves." And on the last page of this poem, Osip had the eyelashes to the middle of his cheeks. "You were walking along Brestenka Street. What we were talking about, I don't remember. We turned on the Gogol Boulevard and Osip said, 'I'm ready for death.' At his arrest, they were searching for poems all over the floor. We sat in one room. On the other side of the wall, at neighbor's Hawaiian guitar was playing. In my presence, the investigator found the wolf and showed it to Osip. He nodded slightly. Taking his leave, he kissed me. He was led away at 7 a.m. At the end of each vision, Mandelstam stands with a cloud of words, drawing beats at the passers-by. You will recognize him. Lord, he hated Tsarskaya Selo. Told Mayakovsky, stop reading your verse. You're not Romanian orchestra. What harmony was? It raveled. And unraveled. Nadezhda said the snow fell inside her. She heard the voice of young chickens all over her flesh. Nadezhda heard yes and no are difficult to tell apart. She dances a skirt tucked between her thighs, and the light is strengthening. In a for corners, he is making love to her earlobes, brows, weaving days and nuts. He is traveling across her kitchen, touching furniture, a small propeller in his hand, turning as he speaks. Outside, a boy pissing against a tree. A beggar cursing at his cat, That summer, 1938, the walls were hard. The sun beat against the city slabs. The city that loved to say yes to the powerful. At the end of each vision, he rubbed her feet with milk, she opened her body, lay on his stomach. We will meet in Petersburg, he said. We have buried the sun.
Wow, I just want to take a breath there. Let me see if I can get Katie in the room again. There we go. Wow. Just want to take a second to soak that in.
Thank you for suffering through this, and thank you for your time with us.
Oh, that was not suffering at all. No, that was amazing. You know, what can I say? Thanks to you both. I mean, this has been an absolutely breathtaking evening. I mean, truly. Katie Farris, congratulations on a remarkable collection. I mean, it's such an honor to have you with us. And Ilya, ever grateful to you for being such an excellent and just graceful interlocutor. And sorry if we pushed you. That was an amazing, amazing poem. So always a delight to have you in our orbit, and hopefully in the poetry room at City Lights sooner than later. Would love to see you both read there. Also want to remind everyone we have posted links with which you may purchase copies of Standing in the Forest of Being Alive, as well as Ilya's work. Better yet, if you're in the hood, come on down, visit us, browse our stacks. We have one of the largest selections of poetry in the country. We're located in San Francisco's historic North Beach district. We have new hours. We're open 7 days a week from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. We are slowly inching back to our pre-pandemic hours. Today's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, through public events like this one, our publishing program, and educational outreach, all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and independent thinkers. So long, everyone. Please take care. We hope to see you all again soon.
Good night. Thank you all so much. Thank you for spending time with us.